Hey everyone, in today's video we're going to be looking at this resin that came to us from Alphasense, which is by and large one of the most unique resins that we have ever tested. So they actually have two different casting resins available. The green one for jewelry and a red material for dental that they didn't send because dental is not what we do. Make sure that you don't mix these two up though, because the dental resin specific, as with every other dental resin, is very difficult to work with. Or rather, it's not difficult, but it requires specific conditions for successful casting results. We won't get too much into that because it's a whole separate topic, but if you're in the jewelry space, do not settle for a dental resin. PSA. Something that's worth noting with this resin is that it is, well, it's not the least expensive we've ever dealt with, but it is certainly in the budget-friendly category. I believe they only sell it in 500 ml bottles, so very similar to like Blue Cast, where they don't have, you know, the big ones, kind of like this. For 500 ml, it was $50, which is very, very affordable. And because it comes in a smaller size, I think it's more accessible because maybe you just want to try it. You don't want to be blowing $100 on something that ends up just not working. When the resin arrived to us, it was in good order. The cap was taped. It was covered in bubble wrap in a bubble mailer. So the packaging wasn't, you know, the best, but it was definitely good. There was no leaks. As it is January, I was a little bit worried about having it sit outside after delivery. You don't want your resins to freeze. However, it shouldn't be an issue. This is just another little bit of information, I guess. Resins are generally okay if they're frozen. Either way, it's still better just not to risk it if at all possible. Also inside the package with the resin was a 2-page printout full of detailed instructions. Started with the printing, general, you know, how to work with this material. And they also had casting information, which I thought was really good. Most of the resins that we get don't ship with anything. If we're lucky, they might have a little thing on the back. This one has a description, general instructions, and safety information, just laid out very, very simply. But the 2-page printout was much more detailed and really nice to have on hand. So reading through the printing instructions, they had a baseline level of, I guess, settings that you have to adhere to, and they broke it up into two different categories, whether or not you had a monochrome screen or an RGB screen. This stuff is also good for DLP as well. You can find these settings, of course, on their website, but having them on hand so that you don't have to go through customer support emails, trial and error, or just hunting through Reddit or something to find the settings that work for you is also a really nice touch. So what were my experiences with this resin so far? Well, when we loaded into the printer, I immediately noticed that this stuff was different than anything that we have ever tried before. First of all, it has very low viscosity. It's like water. It doesn't have any kind of syrupy like a consistency to it. It just kind of flows, and it's very, very thin. So we've never really seen a resin like that before. There's only one that comes to mind that we haven't yet reviewed. If you're not already subscribed, make sure you do, because that will be coming up soon. And what I learned from these really thin resins is that the printing resolution, or rather the details that they can accept or produce, are usually very, very high. And we did find that to be very true. The other issue with the thinner resins is that they also tend to suffer from bed adhesion, which, according to the comments and reviews of this resin, is definitely an issue. We had quite a few issues with surface adhesion on our Prusa SL1S and the Mars 3, both of which have a sandblasted build plate finish, which in our years of testing resins has been easily the best in terms of bed adhesion. So if it had issues on that, and you're running something else that just has like a machined or a smooth finish, you will have adhesion issues. That is the one major thing that I noticed as an issue. And the last thing is that it, because it's a casting resin, it's also rather brittle. However, because it is a casting resin, it's fine. I mean, it's not like these are going to have to ship to Australia. I mean, that's not even out of the question, honestly, if you have a client or something. But anyway, just package this resin really well if you do intend on shipping it. The next thing of note is that this stuff smells like pine, which I find incredibly odd. But at the same time, it made me think, why is that odd? Why do all these resins have to smell like toxic goop? Why can't I have 3D printing with a fresh, piney smell? Maybe an engineer could actually tell me why, a chemical engineer, but this resin smells like pine, which is awesome and weird. The next thing that you will see in these prints when we get some close-ups is that this resin separates itself very easily just sitting in the tank. Now the SL1S has the tilting bed, or rather the tilting print vat, and that does stir the resin quite a lot. It generally keeps everything in suspension. I've never seen separation like this before on any other resin. Now it doesn't bother me, assuming it doesn't affect the print quality or the casting quality of the resin. We sent some photos to Alphasense. They got back to us relatively quickly and said that, yeah, it looks weird, but don't worry, it's okay, it's normal. So just something to bear in mind. So what were our results for printing, since we haven't yet cast? For printing, as I mentioned before, the bed adhesion is definitely an issue, but it is not unsolvable. We found that a brand new, just generic FEP did wonders for bed adhesion. This resin, as it is very thin, does not like to stick to things. It just kind of like floats on top. So if you have a brand new FEP that is scratch free and it just wants to repel that fluid, this type of resin will just float on top, and it helped a lot. I also tried using NFEP on the SL1S, and that worked really well. Now that FEP was not new, but NFEP versus FEP, I know this is getting confusing, does have a 25 to 30% less sticky layer adhesion to it versus regular FEP. Anyway, we found really good results by switching to a brand new one, and it stopped that sticking pretty well. Also, we left our build plate dirty. We didn't clean it with alcohol or anything like that. So there was already a thin layer of this resin on the surface, and I have a feeling that because it was dirty, it was already in the pores, the sandblasted pores. When it started to do that burn-in layer, it was able to stick quite a bit better. So as for exposure settings, we used the recommended settings that came with it regarding our printer type, which is monochrome. Now we used a 50-second base layer burn-in with a minimum of 5 layers. And then after that, we started with 5 seconds per layer after. However, there are signs of overexposure. And I can see that here in the pave setting. If I shine a light through the back, you can see that a lot of these about 0.5 millimeter stone setting holes have been filled in, which is very unfortunate. So I ran this again at 4 seconds, same 50-second base layer, and it turned out better, but it's still not perfect. So this resin can be overexposed, and you will have to do a little bit of testing to figure out where the perfect exposure is. Something else I forgot to mention that's really, really also unique about this stuff, Alphasense claims that this resin is water washable. What? I know, right? Like, this is the first water washable resin I've ever used. I'm aware of their existence, but I've only ever seen it used in tough resins. You don't need alcohol to wash it, and you don't need a UV curing chamber to cure it. So all of those really stack up, don't they? It's just a very interesting material, and all of them seem positive. However, we haven't done the casting quite yet, so let's get to that, and we'll see what kind of results we get. So this is really the true test of a casting resin, of course, is the castability. How well does the model burn away? If this stuff casts perfectly, all of these steps line up to be a very, very good resin, except for that bed adhesion thing, but that is solvable. So let's get these sprued up and we'll see how well they cast.
Hey guys, so we have done the cast for Alphasense and the results were unfortunately pretty much exactly as the comments described. I cast everything in bronze exactly the same way as I always do. There are promising aspects, but overall it's just not great. It's not living up to quality. I don't see this as being a resin that I would ever personally use. Now, we used our R&R Plasticast, same as every other resin. Same burnout cycle, 12 hours minimum. I believe this one was actually 13. In this particular flask, actually, we had a wax and a different kind of resin in each one. We actually did 2 flasks, just to be clear. And those we can serve as like a control. So we know for a fact that a different resin casts perfectly with no surface texture, wax, the exact same, no surface texture, perfect casting. And the Alphasense had lots of surface texture, lots of casting defects, just general issues. So I can safely say that it is most likely due to the Alphasense resin not performing as well as we would like it to be, and not a factor due to my process or the casting. So let's take a look at the results. Now, the skull ring, for example, it is full of problems. We've got incomplete here and lots of surface texture around it. There's tons of surface texture on the inside. Lots of the details are just gone around the bottom of the jaw. There are promising aspects, like the other side looks pretty good, but this is the same way that I've cast every skull ever, and it did not turn out very well. We'll move on to the engagement ring. Now this one does look pretty good, except for in this area here. Quite a few problems, especially around the stone settings. However, everything did come out, and where we normally see surface texture is down here, and we don't see any of it at all. So that's promising. Something good happened. It could be related to the position in the flask. It could be related to some airflow. Who knows? There's actually, I see a little bit of incomplete there around the stone setting, the cup itself. Not good. That's irreparable, basically. So we'll move on to the signet ring. This one has, it actually turns out pretty good, except for the face. The face is full of surface texture problems. Quite a few problems down here on the side. But overall, that's not terrible. Like, there's a lot of aspects to this resin that are good and some that are just simply not. And then we have the tiny engagement ring. This little break I can attribute to our casting. That was likely due to the position in the flask itself, where it was situated. This particular one, you can tell it's due to the casting because it has rounded ends. Those rounded ends means that the metal cooled before it managed to complete. So that I can't say is the resin's problem, but there are other surface texture issues, particularly down here. There's supposed to be a stone setting right underneath the basket on both sides in that little V-shaped thing, and that's completely gone. The inside of the stone setting is covered in texture, and there's a little bit down here and here as well. So again, it turned out okay, but not nearly good enough for me to want to keep it. So that's pretty much the results that we got. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get every single piece in there. This one, for example, the saddle. However, I tried to pick models that represented of that, like all of the different types of qualities that we might look for. So getting the heavy models, the highly detailed skull, the tiny stone setting, and the very thin one. I feel like I had a good mix, enough to say that Alphasense casting green needs some work. I really, really wanted this resin to be good because it's so different, but I was also worried that because it is so different, it might have a few issues as well. So the ones that I cast are actually the ones that followed the instructions the best, washing it with warm water. I did actually wash these other ones in alcohol. Visually, they looked the same. Everything was clean. But you know what? I'm not here to experiment. I'm here to review a resin to make sure that it follows, if there are any manufacturer instructions, as close to those as possible, because that's ultimately who's responsible. I could try again if you guys want me to. Sound off in the comments below, and we'll try some other things. We have Optima Prestige on hand. We could also try boric acid added to the investment, but I'm disinclined to keep trying with this just because I'm not sure that it's going to be worth it, unfortunately. So if you want to see our ranked list, how we, basically it's arbitrary, but it's all based off of our experiences so far. If you want to see our ranked list of all the different resins that we've tried, I believe this is number 19. We're getting up there. Number 19 with more on the way. Make sure you get subscribed so you don't miss those. They're going to be very promising. Check out that link below to the ranked list because it's got a lot of very useful information, and it's a good place to start at the very least to help you decide, what kind of equipment do I have? Does this resin work on a certain type of printer better than another? Does it work best for thick or thin models, somewhere in between? Your budget, there's all sorts of different factors that are all just kind of accumulated in that ranked list. So make sure you check it out in the description below. So that's all for this video. Thank you very much for watching. I'm sorry, Alphasense, but it just didn't quite make the cut this time. But if you do reformulate, we will reach out and we will definitely give it another shot. Once again, if you want us to try to redo this and make it work, sound off in the comments below and we will definitely give it a try. I'll see you guys in the next video.